Hello, everyone. It's Shane Conto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland Talks, my weekly talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want. And this week, we're going to be doing another album analysis with Jim and Alex here. We did a little bit of, we did Rush last time, and we did, God, I've completely blanked on
Audio Slave.
Audio Slave. I'm like, all I can think of is Chris Cornell. I'm like, but there was a band with them.
We did Chris Cornell.
But this time, we're going to be doing some Bob Dylan as chosen by Jim, which is Blood on the Tracks. So, Jim, why did you want to talk about this particular album?
My favorite Bob Dylan album. I think the first time I heard about the album was in a Dave Matthews interview. Love him or hate him. Dave Matthews' interview on the World Cafe in high school sometime. And he had mentioned two of his favorite acoustic albums, one being Tapestry by Carole King, which also very good, just doesn't connect with me the way this one does, and Blood on the Tracks. So I went and bought the CD, I guess. I own it on vinyl, stashed away in storage. And I'm a sucker for acoustic folky kind of stuff. So for me, this is my favorite Dylan album because I feel like it's really consistent. He's left behind some of the corny around a lot in his younger days. And I think the sound of the album as a whole is just like really warm. And so today, before we jumped on Zoom, I was listening to this in a hammock out in the park, and it was just like, apparently a lot of people think this is a sad record. Doesn't strike me that way. It's like a warm blanket to me. There are some sad songs. There's one track that is searingly just bitter, blisteringly bitter, but like as a whole, the album is an easy listen for me. So I keep coming back to it, and yeah, I figured we kind of picked favorites so far. So I figured to round out our first round of albums, I would just pick one that I love.
I'm pretty net.
So, Alex, what are some of your general thoughts on the album?
Well, yeah, I have to be honest. I'd have to listen to this album at least like 3 more times to really, go in depth into it. I listened to it twice, once without the lyrics and once, while reading the lyrics. And the lyrics definitely draw me more into it. I've listened to some other Dylan records, like Blonde on Blonde and Highway 61 Revisited. And musically, my first impression was that it felt like this one was more stripped down than those. And, and I know a little bit about his journey, about everybody knows he goes electric, people boo him, and it was, yeah. And I liked those albums. I liked Blonde on Blonde. I really feel like his rhyming and his lyrical use is even stronger on this album, though. I think there's a lot being said here. And I just really enjoy the production of the album and albums from this era, because I hear these little things, and I'm interested to hear what you guys, I don't know if you can hear some of the wrong chords that get played, on certain songs. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens. And then he goes off key, toward the end of a song. And then you can kind of hear the guitar player, like whether it's him or someone else, like sliding, I love it because it feels very natural. And, I'm assuming it was an analog recording, like a lot of stuff was back then. So musically, I enjoy that, because it's refreshing. Not that you don't hear stuff like that in the last 20 or 30 years, but we did go through an era where everything had to sound perfect, especially the CD era. So musically, I really dig it. And then lyrically, honestly, I'm going to tiptoe through that with you guys as we go through the video. I'll see like where the video goes, because if you, oh man, if you go on Wikipedia and you start reading interpretations, dude, there's so many angles you could. I mean, this guy is basically, I'm not a huge Dylan fan, but I do appreciate him. I do get inspired by him, because it's like he's like the musical Kurt Vonnegut, or the musical Hemingway. Like there's just, you can look at it, his stuff, from personal, political, psychological, social, musical. There's so many different ways to look at his lyrics. And so I'm sure that's going to happen. That's kind of what makes him legendary.
Yeah, I listened to a lot of Bob Dylan growing up because my brother's a huge Bob Dylan fan. Like Ethan loves Bob Dylan. And especially growing up, I'm just like, I hate his voice. And it's just like, it's the thing is like, he's very obviously not like a great vocalist in terms of like, it's not a clean, he doesn't have a clean voice. It's not a smooth voice. It is him with his, and I think it fits the aesthetic too, Alex, what you're talking about. Like there's imperfections, and like his voice, his singing isn't perfect either, but like it kind of creates that vibe. And I feel like that works a lot better in like folk music to begin with. Cause like you could get away with that, and like why people love punk music, because you don't even have to play the right chords or anything. You're just making noise and people will be like, yeah. But like this is like the refined version of that for like hipster people. Like people like this. I feel like I can't listen to Bob Dylan anymore without thinking of Inside Llewyn Davis.
Yes.
And like that's that community. Like it just has that feel to it.
Sure.
Where it's just like you're in like the Village in New York City, and there's a lot of like acoustic players and stuff like that. And this album is interesting because this was what, from like 1975 or somewhere around there. And
nailed it. Yep.
There's two songs that I knew. Like right off the bat, Tangled Up in Blue. Like right off the top of the album, I'm like, oh, I know this one. And like sitting and reading the lyrics, I'm like, wow, this is an interesting relationship. Like this journey that these two people go on. And I think it's so interesting because in songs like that, he's able to capture like some of like the smallest, most mundane things of like her lighting up the gas on the kettle and like on the stove, and like they're just sitting there, and it's like all these little things. And then you have songs like some, because like I love the Hurricane. That song, I love that song. And you have songs like that where it's like taking obviously a really horrible injustice and shining a light on it, but like he has these very like mundane, grounded songs. And then you have Idiot Wind, where he's just like completely savagely chopping down somebody. Yes. It's just like, I was sitting here because like I listened to this 3 times. The first time was when I was driving with my wife on our honeymoon, because what we wound up doing was we switched back and forth picking albums to listen to.
Yeah.
And this was one of mine. And it happened to be like 8 o'clock at night on a Monday, and I was stuck in construction traffic in the middle of Hartford, Connecticut. I'm just like,
how fitting.
And, like I was listening to a lot of it musically, and during that listen, a lot of it was like, well, it's just him like strumming along on his acoustic guitar, and like some of the songs really just sounded like that. And I didn't really think much of Idiot Wind when I listened to it the first time, because like it was that for 8 minutes. And then I listened to the album by myself driving to like work the other day, and like I was really sitting there and listening to him, just like, I really like this song. I really like this song. And then I looked up this lyrics today. I'm just like reading through this, because not all the time I could hear exactly what the hell he's saying. But like, I'm like, Oh my God, this is brutal. Like, I would not want to be the person he's singing about in this song. But there's some, I didn't, I'm not the hugest Bob Dylan fan. I didn't love the album, but there was a couple songs on here that I really, really, really liked. And like Idiot Wind was one of them. And like, I already really liked Tangle Up in Blue because like, that's one of his more famous ones. Because like, growing up, I usually had greatest hits CDs. So like I didn't listen to a whole lot of albums as albums, except for my mom had a select few in her big red Ford F-150, including Californication. Uh, so I know that album like the back of my hand. And I did play that, and my wife hates the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Sorry, Alex.
Too bad, yes.
Irreconcilable.
But,
Yeah, as I've said, I think before on your show, Shane, I'm not a fan of Robert Zimmerman, more a fan of Bob Dylan. But as you guys are talking, I think I like this album more because it feels more like Robert Zimmerman. Like what he was doing earlier in his career was all an act. Like he was trying to put on this, he was trying to be Woody Guthrie or be Jack Elliott or like these idols of his. And he, to me, folk music should be genuine. And I think that's the only thing that puts me off about early Bob Dylan is that none of it's real, you know? But I feel like a lot of this strikes me as more personal or more real or more genuine or something along those lines. Or maybe it's just Bob Dylan coming into his own and a little bit more, you know? But Alex, to your point, I learned some Bob Dylan lore just today. Like I said, I had some time before the taping. So I was in the park and apparently he recorded the whole album with just him and maybe a bass player, I think, and maybe a drummer. So like the original it's the first 4 tracks on the album got reworked with a full band. And I think they're a lot easier to listen to. But if you go back to the original recordings, you can hear like his buttons rattling on the guitar. And there was some other noise, some other studio noise that was in there too. You might like really dig that version of Tangled Up in Blue, the original tapes.
The original tapes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you find it on streaming or is it?
I found it on SoundCloud. I think the record company has like sprinkled them in. Yeah. Because it was like a bootleg, you know? For years. Wow. So I think somebody just loaded up the bootleg to SoundCloud.
I love it. I love that. That is so cool. Sometimes I love the demo versions of the bands, you know, release or let them get out there more. You know, they're just more raw, or they have a different energy to them. You know, that wasn't, you know, it didn't have the static of the, you know, of doing it over and over and over again. So that's kind of cool. That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I you know, this album, you know, musically, yeah, I definitely feel what Shane's saying in terms of, I always kind of laugh because you have the acoustic guitar, great bass playing, by the way. I think some of the bass is fantastic on this album. It's really fun. But there's always that moment in his longer songs where you kind of think like, oh, this is the last chorus. No, it's not. You know, he keeps going and he keeps going, you know, and, you know, I've done that before at, you know, at like open mics where I'll start clapping for a performer and then they just keep going. And I'm like, oh, not done, you know? So there's definitely a lot of that, you know, but, and that's why I think you do need to read the lyrics, similar to like, you know, if you ever give yourself a chance of listening to Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, I think you have to read the lyrics when you listen to that album because it's so raw and like, you know, just so raw. It's just like, it's just his acoustic guitar, a harmonica, and his voice, and he recorded it on a tape and like a cassette tape or something, and then they played it back through a tape machine. So you've got to read the lyrics for stuff like this, and it does work better for folk music, for sure.
Or Credence. Only because you can't understand what the hell John Fogerty is saying.
No. But I'm curious, Shane, like the tracks that have the full band, are those like easier for you to get into than the ones where it's just him and the guitar?
Well, I'm not trying to think back. It's like I actually just pulled it up on Spotify because I remember liking like 4 or 5 songs from the album for me to like listen to like in my mix, and like Tangled Up in Blue and like Shelter from the Storm were both them, but like I knew those songs already. I did like If You See Her Say Hello,
Yes,
which is later in the album.
I really like
Lily
that.
Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts.
Yeah,
Which is, how long is that song?
8 minutes.
It's
Something
8 minutes?
over
8:50,
There's a
so
couple
almost
on here
9
that
minutes.
just- oh. It's funny because like I was looking up the lyrics on this album, and even Tangled Up in Blue, I'm like, I'm scrolling. I'm like, oh my God, how many like actual lyrics are in this song? Because like, you know, a lot of popular music you expect it's like, here's a chorus, and then here's some other lyrics, here's another chorus. And she's like, no, he just keeps going. That story keeps going.
And Jim, help me if you know what it's called, because I know there's got to be a name for it. But he does it a lot on this album, where the verse, you know, he's got a verse, and then all of a sudden he'll start the next part on a different chord in that sequence, in the key, in that sequence of chords, and then the lyrics will lead back to this phrase, and that phrase becomes the chorus. So a lot
Like
of the
Simple
songs,
Twist of Fate, for example.
Yes,
Simple Twist of Fate. Even Jack of Hearts, even the Jack of Hearts one. That's
That's cool. Yeah, that was kind of cool because you don't get the full title in every time that comes back around. But you're like, oh, that was the punchline again.
Yeah,
the Jack of Hearts.
It's like the punchline. He's also, it almost, because of the way he sings it, it almost sounds like he's throwing it away. You know,
I don't have a term for you, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
There's got to be a term for it, because it almost sounds like something, I don't want to say Shakespeare would do. It sounds like something Robert Frost would do, right? Like in a poem, you know.
I know there's some trying to dig deep back into my AP Latin days when I learned way more poetry than I ever expected. Translating the Aeneid. But like there's definitely a specific structure of like poetry and I guess lyrics that it leads up to very specific repetitive line at the end of each of the verses, and like that's what brings it back.
That's right.
And I feel like that's a lot of the songs on this album. It's just the flow of it, and I liked it.
It's kind of wonderful in a way. He's not the only songwriter who does that, but I think he might be kind of like the master of it, because I've never heard anybody do it like over and over and over again from like track to track, you know, and not give a shit whether you were along for the ride or not. I think that's one of the greatest things about I don't think he cared if you were along for the ride or not.
If I were going to stick up for Dylan, like playing wrong chords or flubbing chords or like being off key, it would be that like he's a poet first and foremost, I think.
Yeah.
But I think what's really cool about this is that like it was still a #1 album. Like I was trying to like figure out why they re-recorded those tracks with the band. And like maybe it would have been #1 without the band anyway, but like this was considered a pop album in a weird way. So that kind of, I don't know what to really make of that. Shane, sorry I cut you off back there.
Well, no, like you just saying that is just like, well, it's pop for a Bob Dylan album. Because like think about the context of music in 1975. What was coming quick? The disco.
Oh yeah.
And it's like you had bands like ABBA and the Bee Gees, which the Bee Gees started much more of like singer-songwriter kind of music. And then they're like, well, Saturday Night Fever, I think we got this. And they just took disco by storm.
It really did.
Side note, there's a great documentary about the Bee Gees on HBO.
Mhm.
Definitely would recommend it. I think it's how to mend a broken heart is like the subtitle, like the Bee Gees. But like it's an interesting time because like it's mid 70s. This is out of like that mid to late 60s era of American counterculture where like I feel like a lot of folk music came up and people had a lot to say and were very raw about things, and like getting into the late 70s was a lot more commercial. And if correct me if I'm wrong, but like that's when punk started popping up as like we're gonna do something different kind of thing. But like, and it's interesting because like how long into Bob Dylan's career is this? Because like it's at least 10 years, right? Or close.
Yeah, it's over. I think it's over 10 years. Yeah,
So, like,
into his career.
He's Bob Dylan. He's a big deal at this point. And I feel like at that point, if he's gonna put out an album, people are gonna listen to it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because like he has his style, and yet I definitely think above a guitarist, above a singer, he's definitely a poet. And I think that's why his lyrics work so well. And there's very few, because like I listen to a lot of like hard rock music and stuff like that, and some of them put a lot of deep thought into some of the things that they're presenting. And like we were talking about Rush last time, and there's a lot of philosophy in Rush. But like I listen to things like AC/DC, which like most of it's them making sex puns and stuff like that. It's a very different kind of vibe. If anybody wants to laugh, they should look up the lyrics to the song Honey Roll by AC/DC, because Honey Roll Over, Let Us on Top.
Right.
Lettuce as in the leafy green.
Yes.
I think that's why if I can just take a detour toward, when I watch these documentaries and movies, and I'm hard on the 80s. It's one of the reasons I'm hard on the 80s is because I think we became more adolescent when we got into the 80s. Just look at the posters, of the bands, and, the way, women were portrayed in the posters. There was sexy, and then there was 80s, like sexy, over a red car. It was, it got,
red lips and fingertips or whatever. Whatever
right.
That Motley Crue lyric
there
is.
Was a real like aggressive image being thrown at us from the 80s, and it didn't stop in the 90s. It just kind of took an odd pessimistic detour with the grunge era, and I feel like the 60s going into the 70s was like, okay, we're grown up now. What do we do with that grown upness? How do we, be human with that grown upness? And it only, we realized that the culture, the people, the way we relate to one another, we just kind of went down from there. I don't feel that's just the message I get from, forget about the Incans and the Mayans and everybody who came before. Like in my brain, it's like, the 60s and the 70s, and then the 80s, and then, and then whatever happened in World War II. All right. Like, so that kind of becomes and so when you listen to an album like this and you're like, 1975, like it feels like more mature. When I first listened to it, it's like, oh, it's more mature than I want to be. And then you listen to it the second time around, it's like, oh, wait a second. No, I have a palette for this. I can add this to my palette, and I can kind of dig into this here and really kind of dig. Like, have I been there before? Have I been in a relationship like that? Have I experienced that? Like, oh wow, like it really does, like he's perfect for like Coen brothers, because some of his imagery, you talk about the pot and the kettle and all that jazz,
Yeah.
that sounds something like the Coen brothers would. They would get a great shot of that thing smoking. There's a lot of color and there's a whole lot of imagery being thrown at you, and I don't think that the first time that's the thing, the first time you listen to it, you're just not ready to take all that in. You're not used to it. You're not, you have, it's almost like a muscle you have to work, and I think that's kind of what's cool, about this album, and cool about his style. So, but, and then coming all the way back, we have to talk about Idiot Wind, because that, eventually, if you have something you want to say about everything I just said, go ahead and say it now, but we need to talk about Idiot Wind.
I'm just going to jump in. I don't want to leave Tangled Up in Blue too early on.
Okay. All right.
The lines, you guys have both mentioned it now, and I was looking for it. So it's, she lit a burner on the stove and offered me a pipe. It's like, it's really simple, right? But that's the line that really got an image in my head. Like same as Shane. For some reason, she's got like a match, the way I'm picturing it. She's got like a match, and it's an old like potbelly stove or something in a really seedy looking place. Whatever. That line really got me. But there's others like rain falling on my shoes. Where is it here? Oh, I was standing on the side of the road, rain falling on my shoes. Again, it's like there's nothing particularly poetic or super special about that, but the way he uses it is really brilliant. Tangled Up in Blue is full of those.
Right. Whether he experienced it or not,
I feel like that is part of the old Dylan. Like, I feel like he's stepping into Jack Kerouac's shoes for a minute, for like one of those beat poets, and he's just kind of, I don't know, he created this fictional, I don't think any of that's really from him. So maybe that's why it's so effective. Maybe he does have these like mental snapshots of moments in his life. And that's why he uses it so effectively. I don't know, but we should talk about Idiot Wind for sure.
But definitely. But I do, it is, talking about like, by this point, the beatnik era is gone. Like they're done, and the hippies are kind of gone too. And you know what I mean?
But he was never really a hippie though.
No,
he never really quite fit in with, maybe he was more of a beatnik, I guess, though, wasn't he? He was definitely more of a beatnik than a hippie.
I mean, it fit that culture a little bit more.
Well,
but
I feel like it's just 1975 such a turning point, because like it's the end of Vietnam, and like we pulled out of Vietnam fully in 1975, and it's because like so much, because like that was what, 9 years of like an era where so much culture breathed through that, and the angst about it, and defining a generation, and then that goes away, and it opens it up to like the late 70s, which it's like the era of arena rock, like Queen starts becoming big, Journey, and Styx, and Kansas, and
great music. Yeah,
I love all of that, but like it's a different thing, and
it's different. Yeah,
and before it gives away to new wave, and then 80s. Finally, my phone loaded. I'm trying to pull up lyrics. Tangled.
And if you need a moment, most people would point to like Altamont, to that Rolling Stones show at Altamont. So if you haven't seen Give Me Shelter yet, I do think it's worth a watch, if only just to see. It was a bummer. It put me in a pretty depressed mood for like a whole afternoon, but that's like the day the 60s died or something like that. There's a catchy phrase for it. Definitely watch Give Me Shelter for that. But yeah, I've got the lyrics up here too.
Yeah, I'm looking at, because like even like verse 1, it's like early one morning the sun was shining, I was laying in bed wondering if she changed at all, if her hair was still red. And just like these very simple things that you could easily like pop up in your head and imagine. And it's interesting, Alex, that you brought up the Coen brothers, because who winds up using Bob Dylan music quite a bit is Martin Scorsese.
That's true.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah,
Zack Snyder apparently with the beginning of Watchmen is like the ultimate use of a Bob Dylan song. Times Are a Changing.
Right.
That's
Iconic early political Dylan. Yeah.
But like Scorsese's the one who winds up using Bob Dylan a decent amount in some of his films. But like it's definitely a Coen sensibility. Because like let's remember the Coen brothers single-handedly brought bluegrass music back in like 2000 with Oh Brother Where Art Thou. So it's that kind of like rustic kind of Americana, which folk music really fits in with. And like just looking at these lyrics from this song, it's like she was married when we first met, soon to be divorced. I helped her out of a jam, I guess, but I used a little too much force. It's just like some interesting things going on in this relationship and them going in and out of each other's lives. And I seen a lot of women, but she never escaped my mind, and I just grew tangled up in blue. And
that's one of the ones that follows that pattern Alex was talking about.
Yeah, like every single verse ends with tangle up in blue. And she was standing there in the back of my chair, said, "Tell me, don't I know your name?" I muttered something underneath my breath. She studied the lines on my face. I must admit, I felt a little uneasy when she bent down to tie the laces of my shoes tangled up in blue. Even like the start of that verse, she's like, she was working in a topless place, and I stopped in for a beer. And it's just like, well, sometimes. And it's interesting. It's like, it's very wispy going through all of this, like really well constructed, just very mundane kind of slice of life song, and done so poetically that it kind of like lifts it up. And there's like, if I think about it, there's very few lyricists where it's like this poetic in popular music, and Bob Dylan, pretty damn great.
One thing that's incredible about this, and it's one of the reasons why, one of the reasons why I want to talk about Idiot Wind and sort of the little background that I know on that one, but staying on Tangled Up for a minute, is that if you're talking about a relationship, song kind of goes straight for emotion. And what I've noticed when I listen to Bob Dylan is it really doesn't sound like he's being emotional, typically, like in the songs. It's just, for me, it's like, it's the poetry, and there's sort of a practicality, right, with the structure about the way he lays the poetry out and the way he sings it. He typically doesn't, go like, like we were talking about Chris Cornell. There was this he was so good at like, tapping into pain, in his voice, like this, like the way someone like Aretha Franklin would tap into that pain, with Dylan. I don't really feel like he pushes the emotional button. Like, it's not emotional. It's actually, it almost comes off sounding more logical and practical. And he leaves the emotion in the actual lyrics and the actual poetry. And so that it kind of like, he leaves it to you to dig it out. And once again, like, if you didn't dig it out, too bad, I'm moving on to the next verse. Don't you feel
totally agree? Yeah, totally agree. He lets the lyrics do the emoting for him. He's not placing emphasis on any syllables, particularly out of just meter. Like, it's the meter that he's placing on them, not emotion, right? But in Idiot Wind, in that take, you could hear the anger in his voice. Is that where you were going with this?
Yeah. So
it's kind of uncharacteristic for him, is it not?
He almost sounds like he's like drunk or half drunk when he's singing some of the chorus.
That he might have been. Totally That's not too far of a stretch.
I think, I don't know. Yeah.
So far, the only answer I'm coming up with, Alex, is refrain, but I'm going to keep looking after we finish today.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, but the thing with Idiot Wind is that I think maybe he does let it out a little bit, but I still think he's holding back. I still think when I'm listening to the lyrics, you see the anger in the lyrics, and then when he gets to the chorus, Idiot Wind, it almost sounds like he's mocking it, a little bit.
Right. Right.
It feels like he's setting he's setting it on fire in that song. He's like, I'm going to blow this thing up.
Well,
he's really.
It does sound like a good red wine drunk, doesn't it? Like a good stumbling red wine drunk. now that you mention it.
Yeah, I imagine some whiskey in there with a flask. That's what I was thinking.
I looked at the lyrics, and this is one of the ones that got me. That I'm just like, because it starts with someone's got it in for me. They're planting stories in the press. Whoever it is, I wish they'd cut it out quick. But when they will, I can only guess. They say I shot a man named Gray and took his wife to Italy. I'm like,
Hootie and the Blowfish.
I'm just like,
what?
I'm just like, he really has to manipulate the words Gray and Italy to make that even sound remotely like that's going to rhyme.
Oh, that's not where I thought you would go with that at all. I thought you were going to say that's Darius Rucker.
So that's it. So that's the only one that I did research on. So that's the only any research, Wikipedia, some real research there.
But $1 million, and when she died, it came to me. I can't help it if I'm lucky.
I know nothing. I have nothing for this line, Alex. What did you find out about this alleged shooting and $1 billion?
I have no idea. So going back to the thing about logic and emotion, like you were saying, he insists that it's not a personal song, right? That it's not a personal statement, which it kills me because he says he was taking abstract art classes, he was taking like painting classes, and he wanted to make an abstract song. And so when you read lyrics like that, it's like, what is he talking about? But then you get later into the song and it's like, whoa, who's this? Wait, who's this about? So, and I never had that experience with the Bob Dylan song. So that's why it feels like it makes sense that he would insist, because when I've seen him in interviews, I've seen in the Scorsese doc, he seems really emotionally removed. When he's talking, like he always seems removed emotionally. He always talks very slightly monotone, and he's talking about what he was doing. He was doing this and this, but he never really lets people in to how he's really feeling. And so I just find a lot of irony in that, is that one of the greatest poets, musical poets that we talk about, looked at as like an American songwriting legend, has that as part of like his architecture, as a human being. I just find that fascinating. And this is the one where I'm not surprised that he insists it's not a personal statement, but everyone in the world is like, well, I don't know about all that, because when you get halfway through the song, he's just laying it on thick. There's something bubbling up there that, it doesn't seem like he's able to, he doesn't want to admit, because I know having, I haven't written something in a while, but having songs, I was listening to some really old stuff the other day. I was like, oh shit, this is way too vulnerable. Turn that off. Like, that is cringeworthy vulnerability. I think sometimes you, as a defense mechanism, you try to protect yourself. And this is a song where I think the defenses came down. So that's why, because some of the lyrics are like, but some of the ones you're mentioning, are saying like, what the hell's going on here? I can hear the abstract and I can hear the personal.
I like that phrase you pulled there about it being his in his architecture. So like the sunglasses, the Wayfarers, the cigarette, the mask, the Dylan mask is like that's permanently him now. Robert Zimmerman is Bob Dylan, right? Like I don't, but how much of that is just being cool? Like how much of that is like uh being like out of the beatnik thing, like acting cool, like I don't care too much, and how much of that is like uh covering up a really sensitive, vulnerable guy that's like the one writing all these lyrics.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it is a mask, and the beatnik thing. That's the thing. I think for a lot of people, it probably was a mask. It does end up becoming like the heavy metal thing. Ends up becoming a mask because maybe you're pushing people away with the thing, whatever it is. You do end up pushing people away, but I think that in his case, he really he's someone, obviously he's been doing this for a long time. I'm assuming he's still doing it. He loves it. He loves performing. He loves being a musician. He loves being a songwriter, and he loves being a sociologist of sorts or an anthropologist of sorts. He really does comment on these things where that are going on, whether they're political or social or psychological. But like people even I've known in my family, they can comment on those things and analyze those things. But there's always, when you're a songwriter, it's hard. People are going to get to your chest. Things are going to get pretty close to the vest, and it's gonna come out. And it comes out. It comes out on that. That's why it was so important to talk about that song, because it was like, whoa, there's a real chord there being struck, and yeah, you feel it.
A few things. One, I'm a big metal fan, and I obviously don't wear a mask. I am feeling completely comfortable wearing my nice bright slacks as I drive home from work listening to Black Label Society today.
For anybody listening, Shane was headbanging a second ago, which it's funny that Shane has the longest hair out of any of us right now. Definitely long enough to headbang. That's what got the laughs.
The funny thing is,
go ahead,
it's
Shane.
all going away on Friday. So
yeah.
No.
It's almost been a year since I cut this. But it's so interesting because it's like I'm a big metal fan, and like I dress like a dad now. Like even when I'm not at work, I wore like short sleeve button ups and cargo shorts like the whole entire honeymoon. I'm just like, well, I've assimilated. I haven't worn I don't fit in it right now, but like I own a leather jacket. But like I love metal music, but like I don't look like I'm a metalhead and stuff like that. I think it's an interesting thing that it is like you're playing the part. And Jim, ever since we did my Rolling Thunder review episode, I don't believe a single thing that Bob Dylan does. I don't take any of it as sincere. I'm just like, that made me completely question, is this guy just fooling around with everybody at all times and just putting on a facade? And, it's interesting because it's like a lot of artists put on a personality and a persona. Like, I remember, it's so funny. I went to go see at the Stone Pony summer concert stage a couple summers ago. I wanted to go see Hailstorm because I'm a huge Hailstorm fan. And they're playing with New Year's Day and In This Moment. I had never listened to either of those bands before. New Year's Day is like pretty decent, like hard rocking metal, female fronted band. In This Moment is like this demonic thing, and like Maria Blank, who's their lead singer, is out there with like this long flowing gown, and like they're like shooting giant pyres of like smoke up around her, and it's like all this demonic shit. And then I've listened to her doing interviews, and she's like the hippiest looking person ever. And she's like, yeah, it's like so cool. And I'm just like,
Right.
like sometimes it's like you have that persona on stage. Like I'm sure like all the people in Slipknot aren't like disgusting, grotesque looking people with like stitched up masks and stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
I watched a documentary. I got a screener for it. It's coming out on Shudder. This is Gwar, and it's a documentary about the band Gwar and their like combination of crazy metal music and just this like ridiculous over the top crazy art performance stuff. And it's so funny because it's like a bunch of nerd guys like dressed up in a bunch of crazy grotesque things just playing metal music. And it's interesting. And like Bob Dylan has his thing, which is like cool. But yeah,
and possibly staggering drunk.
I have to ask this because this just like piques my curiosity, because I know they've made films about Bob Dylan, like obviously like documentaries, and there's that one film where they had like 8 different people play Bob Dylan in it, including like Cate Blanchett.
Yeah.
Who would you cast in a biography about Bob Dylan?
Billie Eilish.
Wow. For real?
For those listening to us, Jim did a fun little shrug there, like, I don't know.
Gotcha. That's a tough one. It's funny.
I'll think of. I have no justification for that, but she's definitely weird enough to. But I have no idea about like the real Billie Eilish and how different her stage persona is from. Is that even her real name, Billie Eilish?
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
And like her brother's name's Phineas. So like, and that's his actual name. I did watch the whole entire documentary on Apple TV Plus, which was really interesting about Billie Eilish. Would recommend. But
I would say that's an interesting choice because, like a lot of rock stars, they change their image. She's changed her image now,
and everybody's pissed off at her.
Sure. Yeah, but that's the same thing happened to Dylan, right?
Baggy clothes.
Yeah, put your baggy clothes back on. We liked you when you were a single white female.
Has she gotten backlash for normalizing a little bit since she started?
She looks like she's got the blonde hair she looks more like how would you characterize her?
Conventional.
Well,
like a Marilyn Monroe.
She did a whole photo shoot with like lingerie and like corset kind of stuff, and people are like losing their minds. It's like, what? I'm like, well, she's like 18 now, which like I really hope you weren't thinking about that stuff before.
No, that's really interesting. Is that her moment of going electric? Like Dylan, I think he just wanted to get away from how he was the spokesperson for all these people and they were putting things on him, and he was like, right. No, I'm just a poet, and so like let me do my own thing.
So the reason I asked this question, because I have an outside the box casting here, and it would have to be like an older Bob Dylan, but Adam Sandler.
Okay. Yeah, visually he would definitely pull it off for sure. I've never heard Adam Sandler sing. Can he sing?
Have you listened to the Hanukkah song?
Oh, the Hanukkah song.
So like,
here comes Hanukkah.
They say I shot a man named Gray.
I'm half Jewish, and Paul Newman too. You put the two together, what a fine-looking Jew.
Maybe too Jewish. I feel like I don't I don't get a lot of actual Jewish out of Bob Dylan. You know?
The reason I say is because if you ever seen Adam Sandler in Reign Over Me,
Okay.
it looks like older Bob Dylan, like
Okay.
100%. But I think he could do it. But the Safdie brothers have to direct it.
Good question. Yes.
Right? I think you should direct, Shane.
Shane Kanto makes directorial debut directing Adam Sandler as Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan.
I'm gonna name it. God, I just came up with a crossover with Longest Yard, Tangled Up in Crew.
Oh no!
Terrible.
Oh no!
This is what happens when that pops in my head. But I think it could work. I think Adam Sandler could pull it off. I think it would be interesting. He would definitely have to be like. There's no way Adam Sandler's playing like a younger Bob Dylan at this point. Didn't they just cast like Timothy Chalamet as Bob Dylan? I'm pretty sure because like
I don't know.
Timothy Chalamet's playing literally. Him and Tom Holland are literally playing 90% of roles at this point.
Damn.
As long as it's not getting the same treatment, and I haven't seen the Elvis movie, but
I did.
I have no desire to see the Elvis movie. That's my point.
Here's the thing. If you like Baz Luhrmann films, it's a Baz Luhrmann film.
Is it? That explains it. Yeah.
Not totally expecting this to be a Baz Luhrmann film, then you're going to have a rude awakening. Because at one point, Doja Cat starts rapping. In one.
Oh, I actually dug that.
I'm saying, like, I was in this theater with my wife and Jess's mom and 80-year-olds.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just sitting there like, what are these old people thinking right now? Like, this is my Elvis.
But I'll say this for Jim, for you and anybody who hasn't seen the movie, what the movie did well was they showed you the artist that he could have and should have been, and how much time and energy he should have been putting into. And that's what a lot of, like Jack White said, why the hell is he making movies? He should have been making music. You see who he could have been, but this guy, the snowman guy Tom Hanks plays, he exploits him. And of course, we might not know Elvis as well as we do. If it wasn't for that guy, we probably wouldn't, but we might have, there'd be a lot more hidden gems, and there'd be a lot more of an artist there for us to appreciate. And I think that that's the piece of the movie, but I think that's what makes the movie strong for me, but yeah, it is Baz Luhrmann. I think to some degree it'll be kind of forgettable because of the way it's paced, but I don't think it was bad at all. I thought it was a decent film.
I enjoyed it. Yeah. I liked it. I think it's a biopic. It does that biopic thing where it, like, Wikipedia somebody's life, basically. But to confirm, Timothy Chalamet is starring as Bob Dylan in Going Electric.
Oh, wow. There you go.
I mean, that is the moment, right? That's the cultural moment that everybody wants to talk about, right?
There isn't even a director or anything else attached to this movie. It's just Timothy Chalamet.
I think he could nail it. Do we need it? I mean, is it gonna get Gen Z kids? Are kids even still Gen Z, or are we moving on from that now?
I think they're still Zoomers.
The Rolodex is we're back to Gen A. Anyway, kids don't know anything about Bob Dylan, probably, right? Just some guy who can't sing, who's like strumming an acoustic guitar. Their grandpa likes him. So maybe it's good if it'll get young people like interested in what actually was going on.
Yeah, well, I think that's the danger, Jim, is like, are you just continuing to kind of feed the baby boomers who grew up with Dylan, mostly baby boomers, right? And kind of continue to give them the nostalgia act? Or is it is it doing something new? Is it, is it kind of showing why this was important and making people go, oh, okay, Beethoven was important, Mozart was important, Bob Dylan, the Beatles, the Stones, these people were important. They had something to say, and they were a big part of the cultural shift. Will they see that and go, oh, okay, I need to know about that, and like we did. Obviously, we grow up. I listen to heavy metal. I still listen to Megadeth, but I listened to Bob Dylan because I was like, this guy, what else is out there? I listen to Jim Croce. What else is out there? What else is in there? What are these people trying to say? And how does that affect my life and my decisions and my lifestyle and my values? Are they going to see the value? And the values, like, what are our values? And I think is it going to get people to question their values?
Here's what I see. I didn't see the Elvis movie, but if it's like we got Rocket Man and we got Bohemian Rhapsody, there's this. Soon it's going to be Kurt Cobain, right? They're like, what's it called when you get a model on the cover of Playboy and she doesn't look real? Airbrushed. It's airbrushed versions of these big cultural moments, and I'm not seeing any substance there. It's the surface of this big cultural moment, and none of the stuff that we should actually be talking about that's under the surface. So for Bohemian Rhapsody, for me, they hardly even mentioned that he was gay. Did they even say it out loud in the movie? So I'm a little upset with Hollywood for doing that to us,
I would argue that Rocket Man is the complete opposite, because Elton John was just like, here it all is, all the warts and all, and boy, did that not skirt him being gay. That was like right in your face about it.
Good point.
And I felt like Rocket Man, along with being like a legit actual musical, was everything Bohemian Rhapsody should have been and wasn't. But then people still love Bohemian Rhapsody because they love Queen. I feel like it's an interesting thing because, like, if they tap into what we were just talking about of like Bob Dylan represented that fandom backlash of culture shock, is like, you did something I don't like. That's not what I wanted. So then I'm going to be pissed at you. It goes into movie fandom, which is why Star Wars fans are so toxic. It goes into like the same thing about people getting pissed off at Billie Eilish for like wearing like more mature attire and not like the baggiest t-shirt she can find. Like, she wears t-shirts that would fit me, and I wear like a 2XL right now. So like, it's a very different kind of thing, and I hope it winds up being something that is more of a moment and not just like I'm going to make a Wikipedia page into a movie.
So here's the thing, and Bob Dylan's a really good artist to do that with, because he's got a couple of different eras. He's got the older era. He's got the Traveling Wilburys era. Well, they're probably never going to make a movie about that, but that's fine.
Yeah,
probably not. That's okay. There's some cool songs in there, but the Going Electric. Have you guys seen the? It's funny because I have to bring it up because it's the one. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's the one Scorsese film that you didn't have in your review.
Yeah, because IMDb does not acknowledge it.
But Google does.
It's No Direction Home. Is that right?
No Direction Home. That is the story of him going electric and the backlash.
Well, it's the aftermath. It's the aftermath.
Right.
So I feel like the Chalamet thing's probably going to lead up to. I know nothing about this project, obviously, but I don't know that I've ever actually seen concert footage from, I think it was Newport. I've read stories. I know Pete Seeger tried to take an axe and cut the cord, literally, during the set because he was so mad
Wow.
And that rubbed me the wrong way on Dylan the man, because like Pete Seeger's awesome. Why would you do that to Pete Seeger?
I've seen clips of it in a documentary about the band, actually, because the band had opened for Bob Dylan for like a while at one point in their career, and they showed clips of that, and like the whole entire thing was Robbie Robertson in the band. And it was, I enjoyed the documentary, but you could really tell Robbie Robertson made it. So it was like,
I do remember that. I saw it too. Yeah,
all from his
I concur.
like he didn't make his bandmates look very good in that movie, but like they showed clips of that, and like he was talking about the backlash going on and stuff like that at that time, which it's interesting hearing it from somebody else's perspective who was tangentially there, and it wasn't like actually Bob Dylan talking about like experiencing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I guess kind of reining this back in, does anybody have any other thoughts on Blood on the Tracks?
Just an anecdote. I used to put the last 2 tracks on. So Shelter from the Storm and Buckets of Rain. I used to put those on repeat for hours while I was struggling over Algebra 2 homework, because it was just like it was just soothing like my raw nerves, you know. And I think it's a brilliant album. I feel like it's too easy to be critical of Dylan / Zimmerman, especially since so much like books have been written about him and these documentaries have been written about him trying to get under the mask. So like maybe it's not really fair to point it out, but like he's got a serious victim complex. Like from the title of the album down, it's like somebody stabbed me in the back and they threw me on the tracks, and here I am with these songs of pain and woe and these stories that I picked up on the road, you know. But I think it's great.
Yeah.
I'm definitely listening to a couple of these songs pretty regularly.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna listen to it some more. Yeah, definitely. As someone mentioned, if you see her, say hello. I like that. And you're a big girl now too. There's a lot of real somber. There's some real sadness in some of these songs. And then my only other note was Meet Me in the Morning is, I'm not the biggest fan of blues, but when I'm in the right mood, I love blues. That is a great blues song. And it's one that I'd be surprised if the Rolling Stones didn't try to cover it or say it has not a big Stones fan. I don't dislike them, but that's got a real Stones feel to it. There's a lot in this album to kind of go and chew on. So I think it's a type of album people can kind of go back to.
I think I'm probably the biggest Rolling Stones fan here. Probably.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that I listened to this, because this is the first ever actual Bob Dylan album I listened through. Because like up until this point, it was just listening to the essential Bob Dylan, and it's just all
right.
hits.
Right.
And I appreciate listening through actual albums now. I'm also trying to broaden my horizons with some newer stuff, because for a 30-year-old, I listened to a lot of things that I wasn't born for. But this was an interesting conversation. Obviously, we rolled into some other conversation too, with some bigger ideas and themes and stuff like that. And I look forward to coming back on here and talking some more music next time with whatever album we decide to talk about next. But Jim, Alex, thanks for coming on to Wasteland Talks. And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.